22 species of snake. Some of those are western species, like the western ribbon snake. And then you got it's kind of like the northern extent of northern cottonmouth. They go a little bit further north. And then southern hognose is there.
From the river to the valley to the sea. All the places, all the people that you can meet.
Welcome to the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. I'm Dean Klinkenberg, and I've been exploring the deep history and rich culture of the people and places along America's greatest river, the Mississippi, since 2007. Join me as I go deep into the characters and places along the river and occasionally wander into other stories from the Midwest and other rivers. Read the episode show notes and get more information on the Mississippi at MississippiValleyTraveler.com. Let's get going. Welcome to episode 49 of the Mississippi Valley Traveler Podcast. I love it when random events spark ideas on what to bring you for future podcasts, and I had one of those random events happen this past spring. I was down on Snake Road, walking along the road during their spring closure, and I bumped into Mark Vukovich, who is the biologist for the area. We had a lovely conversation standing out there that spring, and I thought we ought to do this on the podcast. So we did, and that's what's going to be in this episode. Mark Vukovich is the biologist for the U.S. Forest Service, and his domain includes Snake Road and other parcels in that area. They're technically known as LaRue-Pine Hills and Otter Pond. So we get into that during the podcast. So in this episode, we talk about his path into biology. We talk about what makes that area around Snake Road so ecologically interesting. And we get into some tips for visitors, including things like what's the proper etiquette. Here's a quick hint: never try to pet a snake. Also, some ideas about when you might want to visit, what to expect different times of the year, and we get into some of the habits of snakes themselves. So it's a really interesting conversation. I think you'll find some useful tips from that. Mark also talked about the program he started to help to enlist volunteers to help collect data on the snake population in that area, and so you'll hear a little bit about that as well. We had some extra time, so we really got more toward what his first passion was, and that's bird and forests. So he's responsible for some forest management in that area. So he tells us a little bit about how the Forest Service is dealing with the legacy of all the introduced pines in that region of southern Illinois. The birds that one can expect to see in different times of the year, with some specific tips on how to spot birds this fall, since we're now in the fall migration season. Talks a little bit about the historic forest cover in southern Illinois and how it's changed over time. And we have a little conversation about using technology to help out with forest management and with just learning about the outdoors. Mark is a very passionate man. He loves what he's doing, and I think that'll come across in this conversation. And I think this is a fantastic area. Like, I go down to Snake Road just to enjoy the wetlands and the bluff communities, just for the beauty of that particular area. So even if I don't see a snake when I'm down there, it's always a worthwhile visit. As always, thanks to those of you who show me some love through Patreon. Your support keeps this podcast going, and it makes me smile. For as little as $1 a month, you can join the Patreon community, which includes getting early access to podcasts, something you might enjoy. If you're not into the Patreon thing, you can buy me a coffee. So if you want to know about either one of those things, just go to MississippiValleyTraveler.com/podcast, and you'll find links there for Patreon or just to buy me a coffee. And at that same address, you'll find a list of all the previous episodes, all 48 of the previous episodes, and you can click on the episode you're interested in and also see the show notes. And now, let's get on with the interview. Mark Vukovich is a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Forest Service who I just happened to meet walking around Snake Road in Shawnee National Forest a few months ago. And naturally, that led to a podcast invitation. So, welcome to the Mississippi Valley Traveler podcast, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Dean. Thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you on here. And I just want to kind of spend some time hearing about your experiences in that part of Shawnee Forest. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about how you got interested in biology and your path to becoming a wildlife biologist.
I did my undergraduate degree at University of North Carolina in Asheville, which is in the mountains of North Carolina, and I I literally just went into ecology class, and it was probably near the end of the semester, and the professor introduced to everyone how biologists survey birds. And it was a handout that we read, and I was reading it, and these guys and gals were identifying birds by sound. And I was like, how, that was my first introduction to them. How are they doing that? And I just was scratching my head. I'm like, that's impossible. Because I had all, at that time in my life, I was doing a lot of different things. I was playing guitar. I was, I was I was challenging myself I was running, after the class, I went and talked to the professor and asked her where I can get the recordings for bird sounds. And she's like, oh, malaprops, downtown Asheville. She just like, oh, nonchalant. I'm like, well, next day, or maybe it was even the same day, I got on my mountain bike and I rode into downtown Asheville. This was back in the 90s when Asheville was not like it is now. Um, and you could ride your bike safely into downtown. And so I bought the CDs, and I don't even think they sell CDs anymore. And that's where it began for me. I came back to my dorm apartment. I was living on campus, and I started listening. And the one bird that sprang out to me was an eastern wood pewee, which is a really simple whistle flycatcher. And I was like, I've heard that bird. And from there, I just went absolutely berserk. I became a bird guy, and then I pursued a master's degree at Eastern Kentucky University with Gary Richardson, who is now retired. And I wanted to work with him. He's an ornithologist, and that was it. I just birds was it. I didn't look to see like, well, are there jobs? How much money will I make? I just wanted to do it. I just like, this is what I got. This is what I want to do, even without knowing,
Right.
because when you're in your mid 20s, you still got a lot to learn, and it's all worked out for me though. I had a good master's degree project there, and then I followed my wife, who was doing a PhD at Clemson, and I got a job with the Forest Service on the Savannah Riverside Forest Service research. And then that culminated into a permanent position there while she was doing her PhD. And then um, I was there for 14 years, and then I moved up to take the big job on the Shawnee National Forest, and that's basically the lead wildlife biologist. I would call myself like the endangered species biologist for the Shawnee National
Oh,
Forest.
cool. So when you were a kid, like were you the kind of kid outdoors a lot, playing in the woods or fishing, or did you?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So I grew up in the early 80s, late 70s. Jacques Cousteau was on TV. My dad was a scuba diver and a scientist. And we watched, there was only like, back then there was only a few programs on TV. It was Jacques Cousteau and Star Trek. And my brothers, I have two brothers and a sister. I was the youngest. And we would do reenactments of Jacques Cousteau like in the house. And yeah, I just grew up in a kind of a time in Raleigh, North Carolina, where it wasn't fully developed, and they were building subdivisions in basically old farmland that had grown up. And so there's red-headed woodpeckers, blue jays, things like that that I didn't really identify until later on when I became a bird guide. I remembered them. And I used to go fishing. There was a golf course, a really fancy one, and I would go fishing in the ponds there, and they were excellent for bass. And like their security would like chase me off the golf course and stuff. I would hide in the bushes, and then they would drive by, and then I'd go back fishing. And I grew up with friends. We would go out and fish all day. So yeah, that's basically how I I grew up in the kind of in the suburbs of Raleigh, the early suburbs of Raleigh.
Yeah, I was a suburban kid too, and I wasn't trespassing on the golf courses or anything to fish, but we had some woods nearby, and I spent a lot of time wandering around the woods and seeing what I could fish out of the creek with my hands, and
Oh
just
yeah.
I guess nowadays we kind of joke about free range kids, and to me that was just how we grew up, right? Like,
Oh yeah. I think I'm 50 years old. Our generation, yeah, we were kind of like, where's Mark?
right,
My mom used to ring a cowbell like it's dinner time, and hopefully I was within hearing distance to hear that. But and I had a neighbor that really was influential. Uh she was married to an old Southern man who was World War II vet, and they had every pet that you could imagine. They had a pet gray squirrel that that was orphaned and they raised in their garage. They had a bird, they had aquariums, they had snakes. I used to go and play with their son, and we would take magnifying glasses and like wreak havoc on ants. Yeah, so it was good. It was good upbringing, and a lot of freedom and you know interaction with good people.
right. And I bumped into you when you were kind of surveying Snake Road, so it sounds like you still get to spend a good chunk of your time outdoors.
Yeah, yeah. It's challenging because when you move up in a position, these days you end up right here behind a computer and doing meetings and reports. But so far, I've still kind of maintained that 50-50, and I think the key is to kind of demonstrate to leadership and to your colleagues that yeah, I should probably be outside because I can find things and see things that other people can't.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Snake Road specifically first. I know that we colloquially all know the area as Snake Hills, but it's what, LaRue-Pine Hills
Yeah,
is the name of the area?
yeah, it's basically two research natural areas that are right together. It's a LaRue-Pine Hills Research Natural Area and Otter Pond Research Natural Area, which is the southern end of Snake Road. And I think it's around 2,000 acres when you put it all together, or 2,300 acres or something like that. And it's a designation that the Forest Service created years and years ago, and it's a special designation, and it's mostly meant for research, to promote research and education, because they had this grand vision of like all these researchers coming there and working there, and they have, and there is a good history of research at LaRue, but it has definitely dwindled down in the last 10-15 years. I mean, I still get requests to do research there, but it's not much,
Hmm.
and a lot of that has to do with funding overall in universities and things like that. And we don't have the Shawnee doesn't have a research station department add-on. They are located in Missouri, and they have a tendency to work on the Mark Twain more, but they're starting to expand, and they do some other things, not at LaRue, but on one of our management areas in Hardin and Polk County. So they just don't focus on LaRue. So a lot of the vision to create these designated areas, they're good, and we do get some pretty good research, but uh, it has dwindled, and I personally like to see more. It's all dependent on funds.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, it's interesting. So I guess I didn't realize that that was kind of the genesis of that area and that designation, because it seems like it's kind of become more of I wouldn't necessarily say recreation, but it draws a lot of people from the public who just like to go down there and walk around and check the place out. So it almost seems like that public access has kind of become more prominent than the research focus.
Yes, Dean, you're absolutely right. And another thing about LaRue is it borders a wilderness area. So but what I don't, one of the things I don't like about it is right to the west of it is all private land. So it's right on the peripheral of a lot of private land. Um, and yeah, it's in the old days, if you look at some of the historical documents of the place, the duck hunters owned that place
Hmm.
because it's an old oxbow from the Big Muddy that, they made that levee road. So that kind of stopped a lot of the flooding that naturally occurred there. And luckily it's spring fed from the limestone cliffs still. But I would have liked to seen it before the levee road, they put the levee road there. But it has been there for so long that the ducks, for thousands of years have always viewed it as a stopover point. And so it's always been really good for ducks. And in the early days of the Forest Service, before NEPA and environmental laws, yeah, the duck hunters were like, "Hey, we love this place, the St. Louis Duck Hunting Club. Can we build some dams out here and like, and make some better duck holes for us to shoot ducks?" And it's pretty interesting to read some of the old historical documents there about that. And then over time, it's evolved. It's pretty interesting. There's still a good contingent of duck hunters that go there, but over time now, it's become more non-game focus and enthusiasts with snakes.
Hmm.
And the genie is out of the bottle there in terms of Snake Road, with publications and YouTube. I mean, go on YouTube. There's so many videos now. People go out there and do their own thing and they publish it. We, and they have all the right to do that. It's First Amendment. And so, yeah, now we try to kind of manage that because the purpose of the research natural areas was education and like kind of like limit rec
Hmm.
activities, but they didn't put it in that document how to do that. How do you limit, because it's open, it's public.
Right. There's no way to control access except for
Yeah,
cars. You can restrict cars, but that's about it.
and even if we did that, um, people would still go.
Right. They'd still find a way.
Yeah,
So
and
tell us a little bit about sort of the ecological communities there, though. Like, I think it's really a beautiful area, and we'll talk about the snakes in a minute, but I've probably been there a dozen times, and then maybe half those times I've never seen a snake when I was there. But I still had a great time because it's such a beautiful, interesting ecological area. So tell us a little bit about what the ecological communities are like there.
well, the easiest thing I like to say for the public, because not everybody's a biologist or an ecologist, it's basically that area is where north, south, east, and west all come together. Um, and it's an old oxbow swamp with those cliffs, and it's just a unique situation. So you have all these, and it's one of the most diverse places on the forest for plants. If you're a botanist, it's a great place. Wildflowers in the spring, there's a lot of diversity. And I'm not going to get into it because I am not a botanist, but it is an excellent place for if you're a botanist because it has cliffs, and so there's cliff dwelling species growing on the rocks there, and then it goes right down into a swamp. Then you have swamp species. It's just a really interesting, unique place because of that oxbow and those cliffs.
And I imagine because of that, it has also it supports a pretty wide range of wildlife as well, not just flowers, but animals as well.
Yeah, so 22 species of snake. Some of those are western species, like the western ribbon snake. And then you got it's kind of like the northern extent of northern cottonmouth. It goes, they go a little bit further north. Um, yeah, I mean, and then southern hognose is there. Mississippi green water snake, which that's a species where I've met a gentleman that flew from Colorado Springs to St. Louis, rented a car, and was staying 3 nights at Cape Girardeau just to photograph a Mississippi green water snake. He was like a bird watcher.
Wow.
He's just like a bird watcher. He was just like, and he had a huge camera. And it was a really funny conversation because we were talking about it, and I'm like, "There's one right there." He's like, "Oh, oh," he starts taking pictures, and he totally forgot I was there. And I just kind of like, "All right, have a nice day." I walked away. Um, so yeah, it's really a fun and easy access spot if you're a snake watcher. And it's been fun. It's been interesting. I see 99% of the people there are doing what we want. They are walking and photographing plants and animals. Um, and it's been fun seeing it. I had heard about the road before I took the job. My wife had taken some of her students there, to go walking during the prime time. Um, yeah, and it's just a really popular place, like you said. It's just as much about people than it is the snakes and the wildlife there.
Yeah. So what is it? So I'm going to guess that all of those, you said 22 different species of snakes live in that area.
Yes.
They can't all be eating exactly the same thing either, then. So it
Yeah.
must be a pretty good diversity of other kinds of reptiles or amphibians or frogs or whatever that all
Oh
those
yeah.
snakes are feeding on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you have king snakes that are eating other snakes, and then you have cottonmouths that are eating fish. Then you have rat snakes that are eating mammals, and maybe other small snakes. And then you have rough green snakes that are eating, small amphibians and insects. Yeah, it's a really interesting place where all these species intermingle right there.
So we're in the middle of the closure now. Like twice a year, the road is closed to car traffic for 2 months
Yes.
at a time. And right now, it's what September 1 through the end of October is the fall closure.
Yeah, and I'm gonna extend it right up until the duck season, I think from here on out, because it's getting warmer. So we're adaptive, and it's called adaptive management. So last spring we had the earliest closure there ever. I think we closed it in February, like three
Wow.
weeks before the regular closure because it was so warm. And then we have such enthusiastic locals that basically live there. I joke they live there one lives in a cave up there somewhere. And they informed me that snakes are coming out. And I reacted quickly and we closed the gates. Um, and we saw a really big push of snakes really early in the season. And I started a volunteer program there, a citizen science, or it's now called community science program, uh, along with an app that you can get on your phone to collect data for us, to put in the coordinates of the snake that you see, take a picture of the snake, and then upload it to our server, and I can analyze the data and kind of inject weather data and temperature data
Hmm.
and things like that. And they also kind of give us an idea of public visitation. They count cars and people um, to give us an idea. Like, so we've learned like the weekends are obviously the busiest time,
Hmm.
and the weekends are typically the public's first visit to Snake Road. Like, Yeah, we traveled here. We've heard about this place. We wanted to check it out. It's always on the weekends. So a lot of the locals hate the weekends and they'll be out there during the week. Um, and it's interesting. Even when the people that are new to it and they walk the road, they're very similar to you. Like they might see one or two snakes or no snakes, and they'll still say like this is a pretty interesting place, these cliffs and swamp and the gentle road. That's one thing I like about it. That road is not difficult to walk. There's a couple gentle hills there, but it's not bad.
Right.
Um, and and then just the friendly nature of a lot of the people there, because you'll walk in there like, hey, how's it going? And if there's a snake on the road, there'll be a whole bunch of people, taking pictures and video, and like, hey, what's this? And they're like, oh, look at this. It's a king snake or a rattlesnake. And a sense of community and enjoyment of nature. Uh, it's been really great for us because with this volunteer program, because we are engaging people in our national forests, and we're educating them through the app. We every year when I get all the data, I try to at the end of the season or the next season, I kind of do the results of the last season. To show the volunteers that yes, we're using this data to inform management and to learn about this population of snakes here.
So where would that be available? Where do you post that or share that to?
Well, that's the thing, Dean. We don't share it yet.
Hmm.
Um, it is free. I mean, if somebody requests it, I'll give it to you. But like locations of the snakes and things like that, I kind of don't want to give that up.
Right.
Um, because some of them are state protected,
Right.
and I can't give them up, I believe. I'm pretty sure about that. And one of the reasons why I started the volunteer program is the illegal pet trade. I'm worried about that.
Hmm.
We've had incidents with that, and law enforcement acted quickly. Um, and so that's one of the reasons why I started the volunteer program. And then the other one was snake fungal disease, which is attacking some of the snakes and causing population declines in several species. And it is there. We suspect that it is there at Snake Road. It's in Johnson County. So if it's in Johnson
Hmm.
County, it's more likely in Jackson County. It's
Right.
everywhere. It's kind of like white nose syndrome with bats. It's a fungus that is attacking the snakes. So
Hmm.
these were two issues that really, cemented me. I need more eyes on the ground. And I have, all these great locals that are there all the time. Why not help me?
That's a great
I
idea.
can't be everywhere all the time, and it's working out really great. Uh, it's been fun, and I want to keep it going,
Right.
and it's getting better every season. We get more data every season and more volunteers typically every season.
Well, let's talk about basically what's going on here too. So I always forget this. Like snakes, are they true hibernators?
Oh, that's a good question. No, they're cold-blooded. So they're not. They've pretty much just shut down. And their system will act kind of like antifreeze and just but a lot of times they do freeze up, but they can just come right back to life. And so yeah, so each year these snakes come out of the cliffs, go into LaRue Swamp and elsewhere, uh, and then when the weather starts getting cold, they go back into the cliffs. Um, and it's a really interesting phenomenon that's been going on for thousands of, whenever those cliffs were created.
Right.
I would have, I always tell people I would love to get Doc Brown and the DeLorean with a flux capacitor and go back 300 years and see what it was really like. I bet it was kind of like Indiana Jones kind of thing where the whole forest floor was pretty much covered up in snakes because from those cliffs to the river, to the Mississippi River, was probably all bottomland hardwood forest. And it was probably a phenomenal event of
Right.
snakes.
with those mixed in ponds and wetlands and old oxbows, like
Yeah, it
lots of
was
water.
probably a remarkable phenomenon to behold.
Yeah.
Of course, you would probably die just getting there because I'm sure the swamp was pretty impenetrable or very difficult to maneuver in um, to get to that point. And that road was, not there. They were going to mine those cliffs. If you read some of the old documents, the road was put in before the Forest Service it was designated Forest Service land, and there was proposals to mine those limestone cliffs that never went forward. And I can't imagine, them destroying that place.
Right.
And I'm I'm happy that they didn't, and we get to see these cliffs in this place. It's a great
Yeah.
place. I mean, there's owls. Owls use those cliffs. A lot of stuff uses those cliffs. Vultures use it. Um,
So, so the road is closed because it's this barrier between the cliffs and the wetlands. So the snakes will winter in the protected area, maybe find a nice little niche somewhere in the cliffs where they can survive the winters, but then they have to go back to those wetlands to feed on the other side of the road. So that's why the road gets closed a couple times a year. Is to
mhm.
protect that migration. I don't know that we think about snake migration as a thing, but they're not going real far, but they are moving from one place to another. Uh,
Yeah, I don't think it's a migration. It should the proper term should be movement,
yeah.
not really migration. And nobody's done radar telemetry on some of these snakes. I mean, obviously, some of these snakes are too small to put a transmitter in, but some of the bigger ones you could, and you could figure this out, like how far do they go? Um, but once again, on my bucket list. I'd love to have a researcher come up with that proposal and get the funding to do it.
Yeah,
I would be all for it on a few species to figure out how far they really truly move from that area.
that would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so
and and
go ahead.
hibernation, like there's warm winter days and the snakes will come out. And so that's why it's not really true hibernation for them. And they just kind of just shut down, and you just get the right temperature, and they're up in February. They're like, okay, it's time to go.
Hmm. So if we have a warm day in December, will some of them come back out too?
Oh
Or
yeah, yeah. Some of the locals are out there all year round, and they'll see them. They'll be moving in there. They won't be very far from the cliffs. I mean, they'll maybe poking their head out,
hmm.
but they'll be awake in some of those circumstances.
So let's go through a few practical tips for folks who are thinking about going down there. Like I know there's a small parking area at the north end of Snake Road. That there's also
Yeah,
access from the south end, but I don't remember a lot of parking there.
yeah.
Uh,
That's we don't have a real good parking area. You just park on the side of the road, get out of the way so vehicles can drive in and then turn around at the gate.
mhm.
And then there's a little road that takes you to Otter Pond that duck hunters and kayakers like to use to put in. And so you could theoretically park down there, but it's a really narrow road and there just isn't space for a parking area there.
So in terms of when to visit, like have you noticed much of a difference between the time of day? Like if you're specifically interested in spotting snakes, is it better to go earlier in that movement season or later or morning versus evening? Or have you noticed, or is it just better to go when it's warm?
Okay, so there's two seasons and they're each really different. In the fall, typically October, especially like mid to late October, that's when there's a final push to get into the cliffs. But it's variable with the temperature. We could have a really cold October, and so I tell people to watch the weather. Weather and animals are really, especially cold-blooded animals, is really important. Um, Most people come in the afternoon. They're just like us, like regular people. They want to have coffee, and then by the time you get there, and that's the nice thing about this place. It's pretty easy to access off the highway there. Um, but yeah, typically it's like 11 to 2 to 3 is a really busy time. But you could still see some snakes in early in the morning. I know some of the micro snakes, like the Kay's brown snake and ringneck snakes, you can see them early in the morning,
Hmm.
moving. You gotta watch the road. You gotta because they're so small. Um, and we've learned that with the app, because we've had some volunteers go early in the morning. They see these micro snakes more often. So that's the really usefulness of having a volunteer program. You got more eyes that are going at different times of the day that can kind of shed light on these patterns of times of when is a good time to see certain species and where, because we are getting coordinates of their observations. Maybe some of these species, there's like one section of the road that's really good.
Hmm.
Um, and in the spring, it's the opposite, like April. So we close in March, mid-March, and it's typically April, but this past year it was late February, March was the time to go. But there's some species take a while to come out, like timber rattlesnakes, late April, mid-April.
Hmm.
Um, and so you just have to kind of read up on these species. And that's yet another reason why I wanted to do an app, because I kind of view it as our responsibility. Like, okay, this is when you see it, and we have the data right here to show you. But I need a lot of data, and we just started doing this. This will be our second fall season using an app. We started with data sheets, um, but now we've got an app, and it's been going well. I think in about 5 years, we should have a pretty good idea as long as we have continue the effort,
Hmm.
which I think we will.
How can anybody participate in that then? Like, how can people become one contribute to that?
Yeah, so this good question, Dean. Thanks for asking. Um, uh, we started a hybrid like meeting, or so we do a workshop. So we'll take volunteers and we advertise for volunteers on our social media site. And we have been trying to figure out, because in the past we'll have a workshop at the Forest Service office in Jonesboro, but we have restrictions there with fire marshal. You can't have 50 people in this little building, right?
Right.
And so we did a hybrid this year, um, virtual and in person, and in hopes of expanding and getting people just to come to the workshop virtually. So we would bypass having a bunch of people in one place, and then go over species identification, the objective of the program, and introductions. Um, a lot of our volunteers are retirees, and they come of that generation where they like to meet people. They like a sense of community. They want to see people and come in and have a drink, and talk and tell stories. But at the same time, we have a lot of young people starting to come, and they are like this. All their interactions are on screens.
Yeah.
And so it's been fun. It's interesting. So we tried a hybrid this year, and that's why I think it's going to work. As long as we keep it going, and maintaining the app and improving the app, but also reporting the results of their work. I think that's really important, and a lot of that responsibility is on me and the other biologists to report that work, maybe even publish it, and maybe get a researcher to take the data and run with it and do some statistics. And quality, well, you need quality control, because with all citizen science or community science, there's going to be errors,
Right.
um, which is okay. That's expected, but yeah, I think it'll be really interesting, and help define certain times, maybe, if you're interested in seeing certain species.
Hmm.
But overall, I think it's really good for the snakes, because I get to, as a wildlife biologist, monitor that population over time, make sure that it's healthy and doing well. and how it's changing with, say, like climate change. Maybe
Mhm.
maybe they're coming out earlier now than they did 10 years ago, you know, things like that.
Hey, Dean Klinkenberg here, interrupting myself. Just wanted to remind you that if you'd like to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the Mississippi better. I also write the Frank Dodge Mystery Series that is set in places along the Mississippi. My newest book, The Wild Mississippi, goes deep into the world of Old Man River. Learn about the varied and complex ecosystems supported by the Mississippi, the plant and animal life that depends on them, and where you can go to experience it all. Find any of these wherever books are sold. I think it's a great model. So I wish you the best with that. I'm sure you will be able to find funding at some point to ramp it up to. It just seems like it's such a great solution to, having limited resources for one thing, for a lot of things involving citizens,
Yes.
and also, for the folks who are involved, it probably provides a deeper sense of connection to the natural world for them and a greater
Yeah.
sense of ownership over looking or what's the word I'm looking for? Stewardship for that particular
Yes.
area. So it's a great idea.
Yeah. Dean, I really modeled it. I don't know if you know this. I modeled it after hawk watches. So there's these prominent geographical places out there, and the most famous one is in Pennsylvania. It's called Hawk Mountain, and I was an intern there. And it's about hawks though, and thousands of visitors come there to watch the hawk migration over that ridge. They fly right over your head at certain times of the year, and then eagles come later in the year, and that's the model. It's kind of similar to that, except it's snakes, and
Hmm.
it's 2.6 miles.
Right.
It's a little bit more of a workout versus a hawk watch where it's basically a spot. You're just standing there and watching.
Right. I guess that's the other thing I forgot to mention. It's 2.5 miles one way, right? So if you walk the
Yeah,
entire
yeah,
road,
yeah,
be prepared for a
yeah,
5 mile round trip.
yeah.
Wow.
You'll get your steps in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd be a
yeah.
good
You'll
walk.
get a little exercise, and it's good.
Yeah.
People like that.
Every almost every time I've gone, I've stuck to the road itself, to the blacktop. But I noticed there are some trails kind of back through those areas. Can you
Yeah.
just speak a little bit to the etiquette and like what the expectations are for visitors? What's good
What?
stewardship and the etiquette for visiting the area?
Great question, Dean. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I tell everybody stick to the road because the place is unique. We want it there for future generations. A lot of those old trails were put in a long time ago before the designation, some of them, and then just locals just like to go off the road. And there's no law against going off the road, but obviously during the snake season, it's probably safe to stick to the road. And so the volunteer program, the community science program we have, we we do have a rule is that you're standing on the road counting the snakes. Now you can see a snake off the road and use binoculars even and count it and put the coordinates in the observation in the app. But yeah, we ask our volunteers don't leave the road because it's more of a realistic, uh, you know, uh, observation of the road itself. There's some old studies on Snake Road, and it's unclear whether the observers were on the road or off the road along the cliffs. And they got like thousands of snakes, back in the day or whatever, and they're more likely going off the road to get that many snakes. Um, Most of the public, especially the first time people that come out there, they expect to see the snakes on the road. And so they walk the road and they stay on the road. And it's a really great place to get over your fear of snakes because the number one snake there is the cottonmouth.
Yeah.
And when you walk up to it, it opens up that mouth and you're like, oh. So it's a really great place to get over your fear of venomous snakes. And we have three there. We have the northern cottonmouth, the copperhead, and the timber rattlesnake.
Yeah, I
But
guess it goes without saying. I feel like we shouldn't even have to say these things out loud, but don't try to pet the snakes, right? like
yeah.
like people still try to pet bison in Yellowstone, but so apparently we have
Oh
to remind
yeah.
people of these things. Keep your
Oh
distance.
yeah.
They're not aggressive, right? Like uh, if you get
No.
too close and push their boundaries, then they may get aggressive. But if you keep your distance and a respectful distance, they're not coming for you.
No, but some of them I would say can be aggressive if you get too close. Um, and yeah, just it's remarkable we haven't had many issues there at all
Mhm.
with the public interaction there. So yeah, it's interesting. It's just a unique place to have, public with some venomous snakes around. Um, in the old days, they would bring snake hooks and they would poke at the snakes, and it's fun. It's fun watching the evolution of us because we went from that to cameras and
Right.
cell phones. And so, now it's about posting to social media like, oh, look at this snake and getting 1,000 likes. In the old days, it was about picking it up and maybe even killing the snake. We've come a long way. So
Right.
snakes used to be heavily persecuted, and now people are actually flying from Colorado Springs to see them and photograph them, spending thousands of dollars.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it
Yeah,
wasn't that long
yeah.
ago there was a bounty on rattlesnakes in our area. So,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And see, that's why it's very similar to Hawk Mountain because in Pennsylvania there was a bounty on Cooper's hawks.
all right.
And believe it or not, bald eagles. They used to shoot bald eagles all the time.
Mm,
If you go back in time, Alaska was the only state that was exempt from at that time it was called the Bald Eagle Act. They added the golden eagle later, but Alaska was exempt
mm.
because they bald eagles were eating all the fish.
Right, right. Well, you mentioned earlier that birds are really your first love, your passion, and I know you're involved in some forest management programs within the Forest Service there at Shawnee. Probably much of that is aimed at maintaining bird habitat. Then, or tell me a little bit about the forest management that you're involved with.
Well, great question. So basically, all our forest management is tied to wildlife management. We're doing management for wildlife, and to improve the habitat for wildlife. And that is another so my number one task here is federally endangered species, and that's mostly bats. And we could talk about that later or not. But I'm also there to track our management and see the benefits of our management, um, and how to improve the management if it's not benefiting. And birds are the easiest animal to do that because they're highly visible, they're songsters, and they react quickly to habitat changes, and it's cheap. I go in, I do bird surveys. I just have data sheets and a pencil and some gas for my vehicle, and I get out there and I do the survey, 10-minute point counts, and then I enter all the data in a computer, and then you can see the wildlife trends and you can see. So what I typically do, Dean, is before we do a harvest of trees, and when we do harvest trees, we're not taking all the trees. We're leaving trees behind, a lot of trees behind. And we actually measure that and have trees per acre before and trees per acre after, and other measurements like basal area, um, and things like that. So, and what I do is I do bird surveys before the harvest and then after the harvest, and you can see some species are immediately showing up after our harvest, like red-headed woodpecker in our pine areas are showing up immediately because they like those park-like conditions where the trees are a little bit more spread out, and they're all over it, and they react immediately. Mourning doves, which is a game species, show up immediately as well. And one of our goals with thinning the pines, I call it thinning, and that's when we just kind of take some of the pines out, is to get to convert the area back to what it should be, because a lot of our pines are planted. That we have thousands of acres of planted pines here that should not be there. Now, LaRue-Pine Hills was one of the only areas that had native shortleaf pine, but that's about it. All these other counties, like Pope County especially, pines weren't really known to be there at all, and so we call them planted pines. And when we thin this out, we want the hardwoods to come back, and those seeds are in the soil. Oak and hickory they're in the soil waiting to come back. Like, we want to come back. And when they start to come back, then we get blue-wing warblers, and I've seen that. Blue-wing warblers they like that early successional stage of oak and hickory and trees, like a shrubland. And they're another species that react pretty quickly. Yellow-breasted chat and prairie warblers are others. So it's fun seeing that. Then we have some really interesting, unique birds that kind of react to the pines, and that's red crossbills. We just learned that
Hmm.
the last couple years. Like, we had the first red crossbill nest in Illinois in one of these areas of harvested pines. So I love my job. I'm learning. I'm always learning things. Um, and it's also my job to communicate this to the public, and that's why I was happy to join you today.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me too. I wrote a natural history guide for the Mississippi Valley that just came out in May, and one of the things I loved about doing that is it really opened my eyes to how diverse these ecosystems can be. Like, we think of I'll speak for myself. I thought of forests as fairly homogenous, but they're not. Like, there's so many different kinds of forest communities, different kinds of trees. So can you just kind of give us an overview of historically, like, what kinds of forest communities would have been down in that part of Illinois where the Shawnee Forest is today?
Yeah, excellent question. So yeah, in the past, it was mostly is this region is called the Central Hardwoods. It was mostly hardwood species, with very few areas of native pines, LaRue-Pine Hills, maybe a few other areas, but overall the composition was like over 90% hardwood. And then obviously this is the northern extent of cypress, bald cypress as well, just to the south though, not so far north. And a lot of that was cut over, especially after the big Chicago fire. Um, and so that was the composition. And then swamps, you had bottomland swampy areas, and then you have dry mesic hillsides and uplands with different species as well, and then riparian areas with different species. And that's typically the model here. And then um, a lot of that was converted and cut over and bulldozed into farmland. And with severe erosion issues, they brought in loblolly pine and shortleaf quickly to stabilize the soil. And so a lot of what we see now is not really the historical uh, force that it was, and we're trying to convert it back very slowly. We're only managing, like, our pines is less than 1%. We have managed pines, it's less than 1%. So we're barely making a footprint with our management, but we're seeing amazing results in those areas. And we're just getting started because we had a 17-year injunction on us, and our silviculture shop is just getting started uh, back up, and we have hopeful plans for the future to get things going, because I'm of the management side, and I see a lot of benefits with it. And when we have an aging forest like we do now, and it's overstocked, and the basal area and stem density of the trees is too close together, um, it's it's not beneficial for all species. It's beneficial to a one community species, and the Forest Service, we're managing for biodiversity here and having different habitats, like you said, even though some of the habitats shouldn't really be here, like the planted pines.
Hmm.
A lot of bird watchers still like it. You know, they enjoy it, and hunters, they'll still use it, but it's really not supposed to be here. And they're gonna be here forever because we can't manage everything uh, very quickly here, and so it's going to be a situation that we're going to have for decades and decades. The planted pines will always be here.
Right. There's so many of them, they're not going away anytime soon.
No,
So,
no.
right. So when you walk into a forest community, can you kind of can you get a pretty good idea of what birds might be around based on the kinds of trees you see?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, I've been here 5 years, and that was one of the first things I did, is I wanted to get a command of what we had here. Um, because I haven't lived here in the Midwest. And yeah, now I'm really confident, basically looking at a map, really. And if the Forest Service surveyed that area, I'll know what tree species are there, and I'll have a good idea what's there. The one species of bird that is really interesting and unique here is the cerulean warbler. And we have surveyed for those. I've surveyed with a really excellent IDNR biologist, probably the best bird guy they have here in Southern Illinois. And we surveyed and looked for these really beautiful blue warblers. And we have mapped them out for the most part, some of the biggest areas, and those are in Jackson County, and they're really confined to specific areas, and it's really interesting. We don't really understand why, but it has to do with floodplain and riparian areas. And so it's probably very much linked to tree species and insects, um, for the most part. But no
Wow.
research has been done here, but it's one more thing that we've done recently that I think is been beneficial for us as biologists, and to the birding community, and the ornithological community, because nobody has really mapped out this population yet fully.
Hmm. So now that we're kind of heading toward fall, even if it doesn't feel like it today as we're recording, it still feels like summer around here.
Yeah.
What can people expect to see for bird populations down in that area around LaRue-Pine Hills as we get into the fall?
Okay. Well, it's fall migration, that's for sure. And we get a lot of bird watchers that come to Snake Road. They're looking up and not down. It's can be kind of a dangerous situation if you think about it. But this time of year we get the confusing fall warblers, where they're molting, and a lot of them they're not in their breeding plumage. And you better get a good field guide to kind of show you what species look like in their fall plumage, because you can get pretty confused quickly. But you get here. One of the reasons why I moved up here is we're in the flyway. We're right along the Mississippi River is an excellent place, and so you'll get golden wing warblers, blue wing warblers migrating. If you're really lucky, a black-throated blue warbler, which is rare. Black-throated greens are very common in the fall here. Scarlet tanagers, which isn't warbler, but um, it's a great time. The bird migration here is just absolutely fantastic. But if you talk to a lot of birders and beginners, fall is pretty tough because of the confusing plumages that the warblers have. Spring is probably, I like the spring better because the males are coming back in their bright breeding plumage. They're singing. This time of year in the fall, they don't sing unless the weather is just right.
Hmm.
They might blurt out half a song. They just typically do some calls, so it's a little bit more difficult in the fall, but
Hmm.
it's still really good and it's challenging. And if you like a challenge like me, you'll still do it. You'll still watch and try to get as many as you can.
Yeah. So probably waterfowl would be easier to spot, and you probably does that area. You mentioned duck hunters. That was a historically
Oh
it's been a
yeah.
great area for duck hunting. So, what kinds of waterfowl will be coming through this fall in that particular area around LaRue-Pine Hills?
Oh yeah. Right now, wood ducks and blue-winged teal are coming through. Those are the big ones.
Mm.
Then later on, the bigger ducks like mallards. Uh, yeah, it's a pretty popular duck hole, but a lot of the private land now have kind of figured it out, and the farmers will lease out their land and leave some corn, and then flood these areas that have corn, and they'll lease it out to duck hunters, and duck hunters will use that as well. So you see a lot of competition on private land, and but you still have uh, the local contingent that love LaRue for duck hunting. Um,
So, do you have your own like favorite spot somewhere in Shawnee Forest that's part of your routine? Like, you don't have to share the exact location, but like if you don't want to, but do you have maybe one or two favorite spots that you really enjoy or?
well, if you go to, so I put a lot of my observations in eBird, which is a citizen science app. If you were, you could spy on me and go to eBird and look me up, I guess, and see where I go. But I do hang out at LaRue a lot during the snake closure if I can. But I really like our management, our areas that are completed, that we've finished harvesting trees because all these species have come in that aren't typically in our unmanaged areas, like red-headed woodpeckers, red crossbills, blue-winged warblers. Those are my favorite areas, is where management has occurred, and that's in Pope County. Unfortunately, this is the unfortunate part of it. It's in Pope County and Hardin County, out in the middle of nowhere. So after that, I would say LaRue and Oakwood Bottoms is a very popular bird place because once again it's right along the Mississippi River. We flood it, and we get wading birds there. And hingas have been seen there. Um, Mississippi kites nest there in the summer. It's an excellent spot, but LaRue has like everything.
Yeah.
It's really good bird migration, and don't watch where you're stepping because you're going to trip over a snake. And then if you're bored with that, then just look at all the plants. And it really just has everything you need. And if you really want a nice scenery shot, get on Pine Hills Road up on top, and take on a pull off and take a shot of the whole little valley there, floodplain valley from on top of the rocks up there. Go to Inspiration Point.
Inspiration Point's got a great view from up there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that place isn't for everybody though. It's
Yeah.
it can be dangerous. You got to be careful there.
And it's always windier up there. It's down below.
Yeah, yeah, but it's a very popular site.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. Let me ask you this quick question, like a practical thing. I am a big fan of birds too, but I'm partially colorblind. I don't think I would ever be very good at visually identifying different species, especially if
Yeah.
they're distinguished mostly by colors. But I've been using Merlin to
Oh yeah.
identify by songs. Like, what's your take on Merlin? Is it reasonably
Oh,
accurate?
I well, no, it's not 100% accurate. I think it's been a positive thing because it can get people interested in birds. And my other biologist, she uses it to help her point her in the right direction.
Hmm.
And it engages. This is what is really good about it. It engages people
Right.
in figuring out what it is. So when I first started, Dean, back in the 90s at Asheville, UNCA, all we had were those CDs. This was like, before cell phones for the most part. And so I had to figure out, I joke around with some of these young kids, this young biologists. I'm like, you guys have it easy here with all these gadgets. Back in the old days, we had to go back to the CDs, and then on the rare bird reports, you had to call and it went to an answering machine, and you had to listen to the whole answering machine and write it all down. Then you have to call back because you didn't get it all. Now with eBird, you get the coordinates of that rare bird and the time of the sighting and a photograph. So it's verified and you can
Hmm.
go right to it. You just navigate right to it.
Yeah.
So it is a great time to be alive with all this technology like Merlin to help you navigate the natural world and learn about it and interact with it. Merlin isn't the only thing. Like there's other apps by naturalists that will basically take a picture and kind of tell you what it is.
Hmm.
More times than not, it could be wrong depending on what it is, but it's right. I mean, I've used it and it's right a lot too. So
I appreciate the apps. I think mostly just it helped me appreciate the diversity of species. As in particular, I usually have my cell phone with me when I camp, and one of my favorite things to do when I wake up in the morning is to open the Merlin app. Birds are more active in the morning typically,
oh yeah.
and I'll open up Merlin and let it listen just to get a sense of how many different birds or species might be around me. And there have been mornings, there have been, it's identified 10 or 12 different species. And I'm sure there's some error in what it's picking up, but even if it's only 8 different species or whatever, I find that fascinating that there's that much variety going on around me.
Yeah. And I'm an old time biologist. I'm 50. I worry about being replaced by a machine. I really do. Because I came up in the field before the machines. I've deployed some of these ARUs, automatic recording units, up in trees to record the birds, and it stores the data, and then you put it in a computer, and it'll analyze and tell you what you have. But some of that is wrong because you have to train the computer how to identify the sounds. But yeah, I really worry about that being replaced. Um, and I pride myself in trying to be better than the machine, but as I get older, it's getting harder. I lose my hearing. I can't imagine losing my hearing. As
Yeah.
for color blindness, Dean, I have been out with bird watchers that have that, and they can still ID the bird by the silhouette of the bird,
Oh.
just by what it looks like, the silhouette. They can pretty much narrow it down.
Hmm.
I've been out with some really interesting people, all walks of life. Firefighters. I met firefighters that are phenomenal birders.
Hmm.
Um, uh, you don't have to be a biologist to be an excellent bird watcher. I've seen it. I know some that are they just do it as a hobby, and they're better than some wildlife biologists I know that don't
Well,
even do birds. Like, yeah, I'm not, they're a wildlife biologist, but they're doing deer and big game species. They don't really care about the birds so much. Well, they care about it. They just don't know how to do it.
right. I don't think the apps are going to replace you anytime soon. I don't think you're in any danger there. I think probably if anything, it helps to amplify what you're already doing. Like as you said, you can't be everywhere at once as it is, and
Yes,
so if those apps help,
it's a good tool.
yeah, and if it helps people connect to and understand more about the world around them, that's a good thing in the bigger picture, I think.
Oh yeah, I totally agree.
Well, I promised you, half hour, 45 minutes, and we've blown past that as I always seem to do. So let's kind of wrap this up. Like, if people are interested in finding out more about, let's start with Snake Road and maybe Shawnee Forest in general. What are the great places or the best places that people could go to learn more?
Well, the Shawnee National Forest website, and then we have a really excellent like front desk people at Vina uh, Hidden Springs Ranger District in Vienna, and then our office here in Jonesboro. The Mississippi Bluffs, our our front office persons are really informative. And if they don't know, they ask us, the specialists, the wildlife biologists, and others where to go. But our website's good. And then Illinois Extension, U of I Extension, they have a lot of really good and they're a partner of ours. They have a lot of good information on their websites. You can Google them and Google the subject that you're interested in. Um, and and then obviously we have a lot of different areas that you and I didn't discuss. We kind of were focusing on LaRue, but Garden of the Gods is probably our most popular
Yeah,
site. We get a lot of visitation there. And then a lot of our wilderness areas. We have 7 wilderness areas. Lush Creek, I think, is probably one of our more popular ones.
hmm,
Um, but Clear Creek and Bald Knob are right next to LaRue, and that's fairly. It's kind of long, arduous hiking in there because of how steep it is, but it's really good area. Um, and then the Little Grand Canyon, which is a little bit further north, that's a really good area to visit as well. But it's arduous as well. Hike.
yeah.
It's up and down a giant hill.
There's just so many, beautiful, spectacular sites in Southern Illinois, and I'm still trying to get familiar with a lot of that. And I feel like I've been spending a lot of the last 3 or 4 years going down there and visiting new places. But there's a lot to see and do down there, and I really think that the area around LaRue-Pine Hills, like even if you don't see a snake, even if you don't go, during the road closures, I just think that's a beautiful spot in general that people would probably enjoy spending some time in.
Yeah, I think personally, I think it's our second most visited place, but we have some really popular campgrounds, and so I can't really say that, but
Yeah,
I think it's up there. It's definitely in the top 5. And you're absolutely right about Southern Illinois. The bird migration here is great. Duck hunting is great. If you're a wildlife enthusiast or a biologist or even a botanist, this is the place to be. You get northern species, southern species, eastern and western. I'm a deer hunter. The deer hunting here is fantastic. I love it. Um, yeah, it's got everything I need. It's a fun place. There's plenty to do.
well, Mark, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. This was fantastic.
All right. Yeah. Thank you, Dean. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to the series on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss out on future episodes. I offer the podcast for free, but when you support the show with a few bucks through Patreon, you help keep the program going. Just go to patreon.com/Dean Klinkenberg. If you want to know more about the Mississippi River, check out my books. I write the Mississippi Valley Traveler guidebooks for people who want to get to know the Mississippi better. I also write the Frank Dodge Mystery Series that's set in places along the river. Find them wherever books are sold. The Mississippi Valley Traveler podcast is written and produced by me, Dean Klinkenberg. Original music by No Offense. See you next time.